A major COVID milestone as California reopens its doors. What to make of the rise in gun violence across the country, and Chrissy Teigen apologizing again. Tuesday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for Tuesday, June 15th. I am Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Carlo, welcome back. I missed you.
Oh, I missed you too, Jill. I missed that voice. I missed that face. Truly, I did. And thank you for holding down the fort these last couple of weeks. Thank you to Baker for filling in. You guys did a tremendous job. It's good to be back. It feels good to be back in the swing of things. I apologize if I'm a little bit rusty. I think baby brain is a real thing, right? It's not just the moms, right?
So just really quickly, because I do want to get to the news because it's a big news day, but how is it? How are you feeling? How's the baby? Just briefly tell us what's going on.
Yeah. So little Francesca is doing great. She eats, she poops, she sleeps, she cries, and then she does all of those things again, as I'm sure you remember. But no, everyone's healthy and doing great. It's exhausting. It's profound, really. I mean, you and I have talked about it before. And it's really true what you said about how it's the whole experience is so profound, right? Like all of these different emotions you feel, from wonder to tedium, really, right? It's just remarkable. I don't know how else to put it.
Well, I'm so happy for you and Becky and Francesca, and I can't wait to meet her, and I'm so happy you're back. So let's get to some news, and we could talk babiys all day, really. But again, we have to get to some news. I know somebody tweeted, they're like, okay, at what point are you guys going to stop with the baby talk? I'm like, okay, I get it. All right, Attorney General Merrick Garland says he's going to move swiftly regarding an investigation by the DOJ's Inspector General into efforts by the Trump Department of Justice to seize data and communications from Congress members and their staff. Records of at least a dozen people connected to the House Intelligence Panel have been seized, and federal prosecutors had also previously subpoenaed Apple for data from Congressman Adam Schiff. He's a Democrat from California, and also Congressman Eric Swalwell, also a Democrat from California. Garland also met with media executives yesterday from the New York Times, Washington Post, and CNN after it was revealed that the Trump Justice Department secretly obtained records from journalists, which is generally considered a major no-no, Carlo.
Yeah, this was a pretty tepid response from Merrick Garland. I thought, and I admit that this story, I've not really been paying too close attention to this story. But I have to say, I mean, look, the Department of Justice of the last 4 years was like a crime scene. And the spying on reporters was probably the least of it, least of what we know, at least. The New York Times is reporting this morning that before former Attorney General Bill Barr stepped down last December, Trump was already pressuring his replacement to get involved in overturning the election, to actually get the Justice Department involved in that failed effort, which is astounding. I mean, these things have sort of failed to be astounding in a lot of ways, but when you start to think about them, it's really mind-boggling. Jennifer Rubin in the Washington Post this morning calling for Garland to appoint a special counsel to determine what exactly was going on at the DOJ under Trump for those 4 years.
Let's turn overseas now. NATO leaders wrapping up a one-day summit. They talked about Russian threats to Europe and also China's rising military ambitions. The summit called China a growing influence that can present challenges. It also referred to Russia's aggressive actions as a threat to Euro-Atlantic security. Some allies are concerned about President Biden's meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin tomorrow in Geneva. They're wondering if maybe Biden appears to be rewarding Putin with a face-to-face meeting. Biden called Putin a, quote, worthy adversary ahead of the summit. I was listening to some coverage this morning, Carlo, and a reporter was describing it as like a pre-Super Bowl press conference that Biden's been having, where they're like, what's your strategy going into the meeting? Right. And he's trying to put a game face on. But it is going to be fascinating.
It will. I mean, look, there's the real news actually just came out. So he's been on this whirlwind tour, right? He was doing the NATO thing yesterday. Today he's in Brussels talking with the EU. And they just actually made some news. The U.S. and European Union resolving the 17-year dispute with Boeing and Airbus over tariffs. You don't really need to know too much of it. It's a little esoteric, but this thing has been going on forever. And both sides have agreed to suspend for 5 years tariffs stemming from that dispute. As far as Putin goes, I wouldn't get too excited about this summit making too much news tomorrow. I mean, Putin and Biden, they're both sort of like, they're pretty good politicians. Like, I don't think we're going to see like what we saw. Yeah, exactly.
I don't think decades.
I don't think we're going to see the what show that we saw in Helsinki a couple of years ago. The biggest threat to Putin is NATO, right? I mean, the fact that Biden even showed up this week to the NATO summit and made a point about how that alliance is still so rock solid, that already I think is leaps and bounds better than anything that under the Trump administration, just in terms of sort of solidifying those alliances. Putin's power comes from this narrative that he weaves that the West is in a state of sort of permanent decline, which may or may not be true, but that's his sort of narrative to the people at home. So anything the United States and Europe can do to show that that's not the case, that we're sort of still in this sort of bedrock alliance together, that's the best thing that you can do to deter him and whatever shenanigans he's got cooking, which I'm sure there are plenty.
Back here at home, gun violence on the rise. Still, it's something we've been talking about for quite a while. This past weekend, more than 120 people died in shootings, with 3 especially dangerous incidents in Chicago, Austin, and Savannah. So far this year, the number of shootings that have killed at least one person exceeds the total number from the first 5 months of 2020.
I have this working theory on gun violence that probably needs some refining, but I'll sort of throw it out there to the crowd now. I've been thinking about this a little bit.
What could possibly go wrong with this?
I haven't been yelled at in a while, so let's go here. So look, I think that what's happening here, I think that the police aren't really, and I'm making sweeping generalizations here, so just bear with me. But I think the point I'm trying to make is I don't think the cops are sort of doing a lot of the proactive police work that is required to stop shootings. It's not necessarily their fault. I think in some cases their units were disbanded. We saw that happen with the NYPD after the George Floyd murder last year, where they just basically got rid of the plainclothes unit that was focused on getting guns off the streets. Or it's possibly an intentional work slowdown. I think a lot of police officers don't want to engage in activity that could end up with them getting filmed in some kind of altercation, right? I think that's a really big part of this that is sort of being underplayed here. Or some, I think, are just trying to make a point based off sort of the anti-police narrative of the last year or so. Nobody's really saying that, but it seems obvious to me that that's part of it. The reason I think is twofold, right? I think it's, and I say this based on my own experience in Brooklyn, right? It's obvious here that cops just aren't out in the streets the way that they used to be. I can't remember the last time I saw like an old-fashioned like beat cop on foot patrol on the sidewalk, standing on the corner, talking to people, going into businesses, asking what's going on. What do? They sit in their cars, double parked in the bike lanes with the windows up, and then they're on their phones mostly. I mean, that's my interface with the New York Police Department in Brooklyn, to the extent that I even see them at all. But the other part of it is other nonviolent crimes went down while shootings have been going up. So I don't know what to make of that. But to me, it suggests that police are still able to be a deterrent when it comes to some of these lower level crimes, right? Burglaries, grand theft auto, domestic disturbances, and these sort of crimes of opportunity. But they aren't doing the hard police work of actually trying to stop violent crimes. And I think that's what you're seeing. This is a multi-causal thing. We're not going to really know about it probably for years until we really get more data on it. And I think it's important to remember the blame for gun violence rests on the perpetrators, not the police. But we're witnessing, I think, what happens when police take their foot off the gas when it comes to policing violent crime.
Let's talk about the pandemic, a major milestone in the pandemic's endgame today. California will be lifting most of its remaining COVID restrictions. It's opening day for the state's theme parks for out-of-state visitors. That is huge. It's going to be a big boon for Disney and Comcast. Mask mandates drop for fully vaccinated residents. Capacity limits, social distancing, all lifted in most cases. The most populous U.S. state was the first to enact strict restrictions, and that was 16 months ago now, becoming one of the last to reopen.
Also, here in New York, we just hit 70% of our population, New York State, that is, vaccinated. Governor Cuomo had said that that was the magic number when he's going to start to lift the remaining restrictions. So I suspect we'll see a press conference from him today, making an announcement about that. Also, did you see this? De Blasio, our illustrious mayor, I got to give him credit for this. He announced yesterday a ticker tape parade for healthcare workers in the Canyon of Heroes in Manhattan.
I love it.
Right down where you are. That's awesome. It's going to happen on July 7th. That's so fantastic. I can't wait for that. Just talk about like just a great idea. People who could not deserve to be, going down the Canyon of Heroes more than some of these people. In terms of just the pandemic, the last couple of weeks, it's been sort of interesting to see as I've been sort of out in the world more, from being in the hospital to just sort of running errands, since I'm sort of the house husband at this point. Like my job is to make sure things are stocked and Becky's got what she needed. Yes, the gopher. That's a better way of putting it. It's interesting, and I don't know if this is the case in other places. I don't even know if it's the case where you are in Long Island, but what I've noticed here in New York is a lot of small businesses, almost all of them, still have their mask mandates in place, but the big chains have basically gotten rid of them, right? So that it creates this weird situation where, like, I have to wear a mask when I go into the coffee shop on the corner, but then I can take it off to go into the Rite Aid next door. Right. So, I mean, I basically now only wear, not even basically, I only wear a mask where it is specifically required. I know a lot of people are still wearing them outside, and look, more power to you. Do whatever you want. But I just think that, look, this is what I think, right? I think that the unvaccinated people in this country have made their bed, right? And they can sleep in it. With some important exceptions, the unlucky few who get breakthrough cases, some people with autoimmune disorders where the vaccines just aren't as effective. The fact is, if you get COVID now, it's your own fault. I mean, I know that that's not PC to say, but it's the truth, Jill, isn't it? This thing is mostly over for us.
So I saw a pretty effective headline the other day. It was pointing to the fact that the daily death toll right now is super low. It's about 100 around there, which every death, every life lost is tragic. But just a few months ago, we were losing thousands of people a day to COVID. The headline said that there is one thing that everyone who is in the hospital who has died from COVID that they have in common, and that is that they are not vaccinated. And that kind of stuck with me. The biggest cohort, according to Andy Slavitt, who is in charge of the vaccine rollout for the Biden administration, and he just left, he has a new book, but he says the biggest cohort is people in their 50s around, and that's because older Americans have primarily been vaccinated, were the ones that were super high risk. Younger Americans, maybe not getting vaccinated quite as much, but they are still less susceptible to severe illness. But it's those in the middle that are right now that are not vaccinated and that are still at relatively high risk they are the ones who are filling up hospital beds at this point.
Well, and it's also, I mean, the difference in some of the state vaccinations. I think Texas is like New York, we just said is like 70%. I think Texas is like 38, 39%. I mean, with those numbers, you're not going to crush it, right? COVID is going to continue to circulate in some of these communities. This Delta variant is concerning. But again, right? These people I'm not gonna be in this business anymore of like telling people like you got to get vaccinated or like this is why. Like, look, if you don't want to at this point, that's totally your call. But this is, I no longer really like my life is no longer going to be affected by that, if that makes sense.
100%. The only caveat there is just the kids who are not yet eligible to be vaccinated is that your life is unfortunately impacted by it because you're going to take your daughter out. And you're going to want to go to a restaurant, with Becky, and your daughter's going to be sleeping blissfully and hopefully in the carriage, and you're going to want to make sure that everyone around her is vaccinated. And that's the tricky part where it's like we are still all in this together. But your point well taken about kind of just being post-COVID. We've also been talking about what's expected to be a dangerous summer out west in terms of drought and wildfires. We're seeing signs of that already with a major heat wave that's threatening to break all-time records this week across a handful of states from California to Montana. 108 is the forecast for Billings today. 115 in Vegas. The heat isn't expected to break until the weekend. It couldn't come at a worse time for states that are already in severe drought. And we're just in mid-June here, Carlo. This isn't like the dog days of summer yet.
Yeah, 108 in Montana. Yikes. Those are, these are temperatures when you really get into the 100 teens where I don't think you can really leave. I don't know. I've never really lived in a place where it's been that hot for like more than a day. I don't think you can really like leave the house when it's that hot, right? I think it's really a risk of, just fainting, if nothing else. But it's a vicious cycle, right? Because when it's hot and sunny like this, more water from the lakes and the rivers evaporates, which ends up worsening the drought, right? That's the sort of cycle that happens. But there's two important numbers if you're sort of a weather geek to keep in mind this week. 128 and 125. Those are the all-time U.S. heat records in Arizona and Nevada, respectively. Those are in danger of falling by this weekend. The world record, by the way, is still 134 degrees. For your trivia buffs out there, that was set in Death Valley in 1913.
Okay, good info for Jeopardy. And finally, Chrissy Teigen breaking her silence after accusations of cyberbullying. Teigen was called out for several statements that she'd made in the past, including allegedly suggesting that Lindsay Lohan physically harmed herself. Teigen took to her blog on Medium apologizing for her actions. She began her post saying, "Not a day, not a single moment has passed where I haven't felt the crushing weight of regret for the things that I have said in the past." She goes on to denounce her past actions. She apologizes to anyone she's hurt. She says, "I was a troll, full stop, and I am sorry." She goes on to explain that she got swept up in the early days of Twitter where users barely had a filter on the things that they would tweet out.
Isn't one of the things she's being accused of happened like a couple of years ago? I don't know. I don't follow this that closely. I must be back at work, though, because Chrissy Teigen is apologizing for something, which I think is now like a monthly thing that happens here. I don't know. I've always disliked her. I really have. She strikes me as just like a classic mean girl from high school. No? I mean, I don't know what I'm talking about, but that's just the gist that I get.
So I've always thought snark, which is basically what Chrissy Teigen is saying that she's accused of. I've always thought snark is the low-hanging fruit of humor, okay? And that is why, just a backstory, when I co-founded Need2Know as a brand and as a newsletter many years ago, we decided that, and at this point, snark was all the rage. I feel like you had Perez Hilton and Gawker, and like that was the easy, cool thing to do. And we had made a conscious decision, me and my co-founder Josh at the time, and I said, our tone cannot be snark. Our tone, let's be silly, let's be light, let's be fun. The world has enough snark, we don't need it. And it was harder. It's harder to be funny and stuff when you're not kind of like taking a dig at somebody. What Chrissy Teigen did, though, went beyond a few mean tweets. And I didn't really know this because I never followed her. I wasn't a huge Chrissy Teigen fan or like up to speed on what she was doing. But in doing research for this segment, I'll give you an example. There's this designer, Michael Costello. Apparently, I think he was on Project Runway or one of the reality shows. He came forward on his Instagram to say how he actually had thoughts of suicide after being bullied by Teigen. And so something happened where I guess he was being called a racist, okay? And he explained that the statement that was being attributed to him was photoshopped, and it was from like one disgruntled former employee of his. And Teigen basically just went full on him, just calling him a racist. He said he reached out to her numerous times to just explain his side of the story and just say, like, you're not getting the full picture here. If I want to explain to you what actually went on. And she basically just said, sorry, you're a racist, wouldn't hear it. He said he had brands canceled him. He said he had events booked, and then at the last minute they'd be canceled because Teigen and her publicist had reached out to make sure that he couldn't be associated with them. So this wasn't just, I'm trying to be funny on Twitter and I'm making fun of somebody. Like, this went way beyond that. It sounds like it's literally ruining people's lives. That said, I'm all for second chances, and I think it's hypocritical if you're against cancel culture. Chrissy Teigen, I don't think should be canceled. I just think this was a really big thing, and I hope that there is real remorse here, because it sounds like she ruined a lot of people's lives. People are even now giving Lindsay Lohan a second look, because apparently she was the target of Chrissy Teigen. Yeah. And Baker and I were talking about this a bit earlier on Wake Up with Cheddar. I think as a society we need to look at ourselves. Why is it that kind of snark and mean girl approach, why is that something we've and tolerate?
Yeah.
And does it make us feel better to see somebody else being put down? Why was there so much space for that Chrissy Teigen brand, which, again, I wasn't that up to speed on it, but it sounds like it was just kind of mean girl.
It's a really interesting point that you just made, because I hadn't really thought of it in those terms, because that sort of like snarky, cutting thing, that was a big part of the culture years ago. But it does seem like it's lessened, right? It seems like if you looked at if you ever looked at some of these accounts online that show you like the headlines from like Us Magazine or some of those celebrity magazines in like the mid-aughts, and it's like, that's what it is, right? It's like Lindsay Lohan looking, drunk or something.
Yeah.
And it's just like, and you don't really see that anymore. So that's a good thing, I think. I think that really shows progress in the culture. Having nothing to do with Chrissy Teigen, but just that's an interesting point you made.
Okay, well, great to have the band back together. Carlo, I missed you. For those who've been writing in, thank you for bearing with us, but we are going to be back to our regular earlier time starting tomorrow. So I know that for a lot of people, like podcasts are it's part of a routine. So we'll be back with you at breakfast coming up tomorrow.
Absolutely. I'll be waking. I got my alarm set for 4 a.m. Not that it matters anymore. So there's no such thing as bedtime anymore, right? It's just sort of like the day is just split up into these little like 30, 40-minute segments.
You'll eventually gain control back of your day, Carlo. Okay, we do need to leave it there. That is what you need to know for Tuesday, June 15th.
See you guys tomorrow.